Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Huh?
So this time, we are going to look at something called Georgism.
All right.
And this is, one of those things I'd sort of heard of it, but,
Yeah.
not really sure what it's about.
Okay.
But we got a bunch of material uh, about it, and I know you've had some time to look at it too.
I have, yeah.
All right, so um, I guess the place to start is just like, what is this?
Yeah, sure. So, Georgism is an economic philosophy. It's
Mhm.
named after this guy, Henry George, who wrote this book called Progress and Poverty in the 1870s.
Okay.
And it was really popular at the time.
Wow, so this has been around for a while then.
Yeah, it's had a few revivals.
I see.
And it's basically trying to figure out how to create a more just and equitable society by focusing on the role of land in the economy.
Land, okay.
Yeah, so like the actual ground we walk on.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So how is that different from like other economic systems?
Well, the big thing about Georgism is that it sees land as being different from other kinds of wealth. You know, the things that you make with your hands or your mind, like your labor or your capital.
So like if I
Yeah.
like build a house
Yeah, exactly.
that's
Yeah.
different from the land the house is on.
Yeah, that's the idea. The house you built, that's yours. You created that.
Okay.
But the land underneath it, no one created that.
Mm-hmm.
It was just there.
Right.
So Georgists say the value of land should be shared by everyone because everyone benefits from it in some way.
Okay, so then how do you actually like implement that?
Right. So that's where the land value tax, or LVT, comes in.
LVT.
Yeah, that's the big idea.
Gotcha.
And it's pretty radical, actually.
In what way?
Well, Georgists say that the LVT should be the only tax.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
No income tax, no sales tax.
Nope, just the LVT.
It's pretty different.
It is. So the way it works is you tax the value of the land itself, not what's built on it.
Oh, I see.
So if you have a big empty lot in the middle of a city, you're going to pay a lot of LVT
Makes sense.
because that land is super valuable even though you're not doing anything with it. Mm-hmm.
But if you have a small house on a small lot in the suburbs, you'll pay less,
Okay.
even if your house is worth more than the empty lot,
So it's all about location then.
pretty much.
Interesting.
And the idea is that this would encourage people to use land more efficiently.
How so?
Well, if you're sitting on a valuable piece of land and not doing anything with it, you're going to be paying a lot of taxes.
Right.
So you're either going to have to develop it or sell it to someone who will.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that would make more land available for housing and businesses and things like that.
So this sounds like it could really impact like housing affordability if it was actually put into place.
Yeah, that's one of the big arguments in favor of Georgism.
Okay.
They say that the LVT would help to reduce housing costs by making it more expensive to hoard land.
And that's definitely a huge issue nowadays.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that Georgism is about creating a more just and equitable society.
Yeah.
How does the LVT tie into that? Well, Georgists argue that the current system of land ownership is inherently unfair.
Why is that?
They say that the value of land often increases not because of anything the owner does, but because of things that society as a whole does,
What kinds of things?
like building roads and schools and parks and, just creating a desirable place to live.
Mm-hmm.
So Georgists say that the LVT is a way to capture that value that society creates and redistribute it to everyone.
Okay, so instead of that value just going to whoever happens to own the land.
Exactly. And they argue that this would help to reduce economic inequality
I see.
because right now a lot of wealth is just tied up in land ownership.
Makes sense.
Right.
All right, so we've talked about how the LVT is supposed to work, but are there any actual examples of it being used in the real world?
Yeah, there are a few places that have implemented some aspects of Georgism.
Oh, really?
Like where,
One example is Hong Kong.
okay.
They have a system where the government leases land to private developers, and that lease revenue makes up a big chunk of their budget. And then there's Singapore.
Right.
They have a lot of government ownership of land, and they use that to control development and create affordable housing.
So it's not exactly the LVT, but it's based on the same idea of land being a shared resource.
Yeah, exactly.
And the material also mentioned Pennsylvania.
Yeah, some cities in Pennsylvania have something called the split rate property tax.
What's that?
It's where they tax the value of land at a higher rate than the value of buildings.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like a mini LVT.
Yeah, you could say that.
So it seems like there's some real-world examples of Georgist principles being put into practice.
Yeah, definitely. But it's important to note that none of these places have fully implemented the LVT as Henry George envisioned it.
Right, of course. But it's still interesting to see those ideas being used in different ways.
Definitely.
Now, I'm sure there are also criticisms of Georgism.
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some challenges and critiques.
Like what?
Well, one of the big ones is that it can be really hard to figure out the exact value of land, especially if you're trying to separate it from the value of any improvements that have been made to it.
Exactly. How do you determine what the land would be worth if it was just bare dirt?
Right.
That's a tough question.
And the material mentioned that some people worry that the LVT would discourage people from making improvements to their property.
Yeah, because if you build a fancy new house on your land, your LVT is going to go up,
Right.
even though you've actually made the land more valuable.
Makes sense.
And of course, there's always the issue of political opposition.
Yeah, anytime you try to change the way things are,
Right.
especially when it comes to taxes,
Right.
you're going to run into some resistance.
Absolutely. Especially from people who benefit from the current system.
So even though Georgism has been around for a while, it seems like there are still some pretty big hurdles to overcome before it could become mainstream.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a really interesting idea that challenges us to think about the role of land in our economy.
And how we can create a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And even if the full LVT never gets implemented, I think there are some valuable lessons to be learned from Georgism.
Like what?
Well, I think it forces us to ask some tough questions about who really owns the value of land.
And who should benefit from it?
Yeah, and I think those questions are more relevant than ever today as we grapple with issues like wealth inequality and affordable housing.
So maybe Henry George was onto something after all.
Maybe so.
Anyway, that's our deep dive on Georgism. Thanks for listening.
My pleasure.